Canadian bankers are making out like canary-clad bandits because of higher banking fees than other countries like Britain and Australia are seeing. That was the conclusion of a column I wrote this week. Hi, my name is John Ivison. I am your host. And the column was sparked by some fascinating testimony at a House committee, and that is not an oxymoron, but it was centred around my guest this week, and she is Michelle Rempel Garner, who is the MP for Calgary Nose Hill for the Conservative Party. Michelle, welcome.
Thanks for having me, John.
So, at the committee, you were looking at credit card practices in Canada. One of the witnesses was an RBC executive called Ramesh Siromani, and I think it would be fair to say that he was sandbagged by you and your colleague Adam Chambers when you started asking him about e-transfers. Now, it turns out that Siromani is on the board of Interac, which is the main player in this space. And you were asking him about the fees that Canadians are paying in exchange for the services they're getting. Can you outline what you asked him, what he said, and what you've done subsequently?
Sure. So I just think for listeners, it's important to explain what we're talking about, because sometimes when you talk about banking, it's this big technical space. So e-transfers, over 88% of Canadians use them. You and I've used them. It's essentially logging onto your bank account in Canada and transferring money to, your pet sitter, or maybe it's your landlord to pay rent. But it's a very popular service, over 1 billion uses. I think it was in 2022 was the last stat I saw. So Interac is the main facilitator of this service, okay? So that's important to note. Now, Canadians pay for the service of e-transfers either through, annual or monthly bank fees, or if they go over the amount of e-transfers they would have in their annual package, they might pay an overage fee, or if they're on a pay-per-use plan, it's usually between $1 and $1.50. So Canadians are paying for this, but banks are also paying Interac for facilitating the fee, right? So the problem is, though, as you just said, is that the banks actually functionally own Interac. So what we were getting at committee was we were asking how much Interac charges banks for facilitating e-transfers. And what we found in the testimony from the person you mentioned is that there is something called a volume-based pricing scale for Interac charging banks for the service of facilitating e-transfers. But here's the rub. Big banks, from what we've heard, are getting a big price discount for that service versus what smaller financial institutions are getting paid or have to pay. And why that's a problem is because, you can do the math on this. Big banks would be making more of a profit off of individual consumers, off of the fees they're paying, okay? But also, smaller institutions, it's harder for them to get into the space because they're paying higher fees. And, so it's not just a problem for consumers, it's also a problem for small businesses or financial industry startups that want to get into this space and disrupt it, because the banks, from what I can see, don't really have a motivation to lower prices by allowing more competition in the market. So what have we done? We wrote, my colleague Adam Chambers and I, Adam's on the finance committee. He's got a background in finance. He understands this space really well. We wrote to the Competition Bureau, which has expanded power now to look at this issue, and the broader payments industry writ large. And then today, just a few minutes ago, actually, I moved a motion at the industry committee, which was unanimously passed, to, on behalf of the parliamentary committee, also encourage the Competition Bureau to look at this. So we hope to see the Competition Bureau look at the e-transfer payment system, but also the payments industry writ large, because of the impact that it has on the Canadian economy. I mean, like, John, nobody's cash, we should keep cash for sure, but most people bank using some sort of financial transaction now. And the fees that are associated with that in all different ways, shapes, or forms really does impact the economy. So we want to make sure that there's competition in the space and that
growing,
industry
right?
can get in on that. It sure is.
This is something we're going to see more of. So let's just recap a little bit there. There was a lot there. The fee schedule is not publicly available, right? And when you asked the RBC executive how it all worked, he claimed ignorance, which you were slightly gobsmacked at, given the fact that he sits on the board of Interac. But he did concede that it's volume based, so therefore the companies that have got most volume, which we assume is RBC and TD, would pay at the lower end of the transaction fee,
right,
which you said was, you heard anecdotally, it was 6 cents per transaction, and they're charging $1 to $1.50 per customer, so there's a big profit margin. And the smaller companies with less volume are going to be paying 43 cents per transaction, which gives the big players a substantial advantage, it would seem. Is that so? I mean, your point, I guess, is that it's not fair to the consumer. What do you hope that the competition is going to do about it?
Well, you're right in terms of what we've heard anecdotally, but the key problem here is that Interac is the dominant player, right? And because the banks sort of functionally own Interac, it would be hard for, let's say, a new financial services company to break into that space, which in theory is a space that should be populated by a lot of different companies, right? This isn't a new product or service. So what the reason why we want the Competition Bureau to look at this is to say is because of the way that Interac is structured in terms of its ownership, its influence of the big banks on its board of directors, is that what we would call an abuse of dominance? This is a term that's now been sort of strengthened in the Competition Act. The Competition Bureau now has more powers to look at this issue. And if there is indeed a case here, it's not been proven, but it's something that we want the Competition Bureau to look at because, encouraging competition in sectors of the Canadian economy, not just this one, where traditionally there hasn't been a lot of competition and consumers are paying higher prices because of it, obviously the government needs to act and make changes to ensure that competition exists. So that's where we're at right now. But I mean, this is one, like the e-transfer ecosystem is one drop in the bucket of the broader issue of competition in the banking sector.
Right, so that's where I want to go next. I mean, so let's take a step back. After I wrote that piece and after your committee appearance, I got a flood of feedback. Some people pointed out that Canadians get a good deal from their banking services. It's cheap and timely, at least relative to the United States, which I think is a crucial point. Now, the United States is not the benchmark for this industry. I don't think it's fragmented, and we've seen in the financial crisis how badly it performed. By contrast, it was pointed out that the Canadian banks didn't collapse during the Great Recession. We have a small number of well-regulated banks, and we have strong capital requirements. In fact, the World Economic Forum, which I know is not flavour of the month among some people, but it's deemed Canada's banks to be the strongest in the world. And our insurance system is such that that not one Canadian consumer has lost a dollar since 1967. So, I mean, do you agree essentially that the structure we have is sound? And if so, should we be prepared to put up with less competition just to preserve that status quo?
Well, I think you're conflating a premise that's wrong, which is that Canadians can't have high-quality banking services without getting hosed on, e-transfer or payment fees. Those are two completely different premises, and I think that's a premise that the banks want to perpetuate. Right? It's like, oh well, if we can't have more competition in this space because then that would mean poorer banking. And I come on, that's largely. Right, so I was playing devil's advocate there, and there is another shoe to drop, and that is that other readers wrote to me raging about being charged $60 for new checks unless you buy a $29 a month premium account. And they complained that banks make profits when they make an electronic fund transfer and it sits there for 4 days, and the banks use that money to generate interest. And in the article I referred to a report by a consultancy called North Economics that suggested that Canadians are being overcharged by around $8 billion in fees compared to Britain and Australia, where there are no fees to open a new account, where you can go and use another bank's ATM without being charged a convenience fee. The Liberals have promised some action on some of what they call junk fees, although that action has not come into being yet. Is this somewhere that you think a Conservative government could and would act? Well, the Conservatives promised to build or plant 2 billion trees. I mean,
the Liberals, you mean?
Sorry, the Liberals. Yes, the Liberals. The Liberals. I take it back. No, I like what are Conservatives? We're already acting on this, John. My colleague Ryan Williams, he actually tabled a bill last year. I'm going to get the number right. It's C-365. Its short title is the Consumer-Led Banking Act, specifically to deal with this issue, which is the Liberal government. They keep promising to do something about all of the issues we've been talking about today with regard to competitiveness in Canada's banking sector. And they've done nothing. They keep talking about open banking and done nothing. And this doesn't sound like a sexy topic. It oftentimes doesn't come to the front burner of political debates, but it really does underscore both the affordability issues that Canadians are having, but also this like emerging concern, which is extremely valid, about Canada's economic productivity, right? Is our economy sustainable? Will it be able to protect jobs and create jobs? But no, I think it's really fair to note that something we haven't talked about yet is that the impact of some of these fees, these transaction fees, everything you just talked about, the $60 checks, when you add that up over every small business, every consumer in the country, I think it's a fair question to ask on if that is actually a macroeconomic determinant to Canada's economic growth and productivity right now. So, long answer to your short question is, of course, Conservatives are going to act on this. We've already been acting on it with my colleague Ryan Williams' bill. I think it was actually being discussed in committee as recently as a couple of weeks ago. But the government should have been moving on this stuff they've had 9 years. And when I think about how far back and how behind Canada is to peer nations like the UK, I just don't understand why they haven't moved on this. This is low-hanging fruit. This is critical affordability stuff, right?
It's not. I mean, it's a small amount every transaction, but the estimate is that it was $17 billion worth of fees last year.
You got it. That's a lot of billions, right? And it's average Canadians that are paying that. It is smaller financial institutions. It's small businesses. And like to your point earlier, it's also, this has an impact on emerging startups that are looking at modernizing the financial services industry, that are just saying like, look, we can't plug into this system in Canada because of rent-seeking policies that the government refuses to move on. And that's my concern here, is that the government, for whatever reason, maybe they're captured one way or the other. I don't know. Maybe there was a lot of steak dinners that were bought. Who knows, right? But the reality is they haven't moved on this, and it's impacting the economy. So giddy up. We need some changes.
I mean, the criticism of Canada is that it's overprotected underachievers. And I think this sector is, writ large in that stuff. Listen,
I love that.
While I have you here, thoughts on the wider political landscape. Can this Parliament stagger on for another year when we seem to have reached the point of peak political dysfunction?
I mean, that's really a question for a Liberal caucus member, I think. I mean, from our perspective, I'll give you my 2 cents sitting in the House of Commons. To me, the Prime Minister is out of steam. He doesn't have any ideas or any narrative that is going to materially address some of the big issues that Canadians are facing, like affordability, of course, right? Then you've got my party leader, Pierre Poilievre, coming in and being like bold policy initiatives like the removal of GST on new homes this week. Great press off of that. So like, it's a question for the Liberal backbench. It's like, here you've got this like super spent leader with no ideas. And now everybody's like, from what I hear in Ottawa this week, it's like the Liberal backbench is like hanging on for the possibility of a cabinet appointment. And they're fiddling while, not Rome burns, while Ottawa and Canada burns. So it's a question for them. I mean, you can see that our committee's functioning. I'm still getting bills tabled, motions passed in committee, but this is like, I mean, I've known you for a long time, John. I've been around here a hot minute, and the dysfunction the Liberals are causing is it's something. It's do
you think
it's
some
a
of those,
spectacle.
Do you think some of those disgruntled backbenchers could either abstain or even vote with the opposition on a non-confidence vote?
I mean, I'll just say this. It seems to me that a lot of the Liberal backbench never really understood that the power they hold as individual MPs, right? There's a duality in politics where you have to be working with your party to create policy and pass legislation. But there are moments when, as a legislator, you have to stand up for what's right. And that's really a question for them. Do they have the courage? Have they ever had a culture in their party of doing that? And there's not a lot of evidence of that, right? It's not like the Conservative Party where nobody can accuse us of not having independent thought and independent members. So we'll see. I don't know.
Would testify to that, I'm sure.
Well, we do have mechanisms in our party. Like the Liberals have a problem because they not only don't have the Reform Act, so they can't, as a caucus, change leaders. But they also, neutered their party constitution. Like even their members can't get rid of their leader. So, the Conservative Party has both options, which leads to, I think, more accountability and more caucus, more motivation for caucus to be independent. But here we are.
It's remarkable to me that the Liberal caucus voted unanimously to reject the Reform Act after the 2021 election. Now maybe they were told to reject it, but either way, it does basically, they reneged on their own responsibility, essentially.
Well, and I can't believe that their members would have taken a leadership review mechanism entirely out of their constitution. I think that's the bigger issue. But from my perspective, I'm just looking across the aisle at a government who has paralyzed Parliament because they won't respect the will of Parliament, again, on releasing documents. They come to committees with no plan. They don't have a legislative agenda beyond, I think the Prime Minister Trudeau just trying to cling to power until he figures out what his next gig is. And that's not good for any Canadian, right?
Right.
We're not here. We're not at a juncture where Canada can afford this at all. Literally can't afford this. So
right.
We'll see. We'll see what happens.
We're going to have an economic update, I guess, but there is...
Are we? Are we? Do you know something I don't?
I gather, but there's really no money left to spend, so it can't be full of measures. And I guess we might stagger onto a budget where they essentially unveil an election platform. But
well, and that's the thing is, you mentioned. So first of all, I haven't heard that there's an economic update. I think that the gossip here in Ottawa is that they might not do that. We'll see. But your point is valid. They are out of money. They have literally bankrupted the federal government.
Well, at least if they're going to live within the constraints of their own plan, which was unveiled in the last budget. If you're going to see debt to GDP keep falling, et cetera, then you can't spend more.
Well, and also are we at the territory where we're risking a credit downgrade, right? Which would have an impact on our debt servicing costs as well too, which in turn has an impact on the ability of the federal government to weather shocks or build infrastructure or provide more support for things like healthcare. And that's the level of mismanagement we're seeing now. So if you know something I don't on the fall update, I'd love to hear the tea. But for now, it's a grim and dismal situation. Yeah,
it certainly feels like the end of days. Anyway, good luck with your
on that cheery note.
Venture. Happy Halloween.
Thanks. Happy Halloween.
Okay, Michelle. Thank you very much for your time and your expertise. Good luck.